every heart you plant a seed. A soul so pure you guide our need. Noha, you touch us with your grace, a light that shines in every space. With every word you lift us high. You show us how to reach the sky. Your love a beacon strong and true. In your embrace we're born anew. Noha, you're the light we follow. You turn our pain into tomorrow. A blessing here, a blessing still. Oh, lost grace, your soul will fill.
Welcome back to the Sufficient podcast. Today we're going to chat about shame. I think I've alluded to this in at least 2 of the last 3 episodes, and I thought maybe it's time we have a conversation about shame, because one of the things about shame is that we often don't want to talk about it. We have shame around shame, actually. It's like a double whammy. But one thing about shame, though, is that shame erodes. And I've said this before. I'm pretty sure of it. It starts to, it seeps into our subconscious, and it seeps into our unconscious. And it starts to inform the way we behave in the world, the way we speak, what we choose, what we do not choose, what we stay away from, what we walk towards to. And if you look at all of those things, it actually ends up being who you are, right? So if a past experience has brought you shame, then it stands to reason that over time it has created in you some form of your identity, right? Which means also that there's some part of your identity that may not actually be true, right? And this is actually the path of walking ourselves to authenticity. This is actually the path, or the segue, I guess, or the gateway, probably more like it, of us walking towards our truest self. Shame is one of those things that we need to deal with. So what is shame? Again, once I sat in a class with my mentor, Dr. Demartini, and he described shame in its simplest form, and I was almost dumbfounded by the simplicity of it. That thing that you don't want to tell anyone else. That thing in a conversation that you want to avoid. That thing that you withhold saying because you fear judgment. Right? So what is it that you have that you don't want to speak about? What are those topics? Because even if your shame is so deeply buried that you can't remember, your demonstration of your life, your actual engagement in the world is actually going to start showing you that. And one of the ways in finding out is, what are those things that you don't want to speak about, right? Now, again, none of us has hawked this planet saying, you know what, I'm just going to gather me some shame. No. None of us has been that direct in walking around and seeking shame. Shame are often things that has happened to us that we feel shameful, of course, about, disgraced about, uncomfortable about, and things that I'm actually going to leave it there. So what are some of the things that we are shameful about, or can be, or in my field, I find it often, right? What are some of the things we find shame in in a past way of being, right? Our past, right? So let's assume I was a loud, reckless, vivacious, almost obnoxious young lady or teenager back in the day, and rebellious. I may have shame around that. By the way, that was a full description of me. That was who I was, right? As a teenager and as a young adult. Now, I could very easily walk around with the shame of who I was back then, or I could face it. And the ways in which we face it is we go back there. We actually go and sit in those moments and say, hold on, why did I act the way I did? Why did I behave in the ways that I did? What was it that I perceived was missing? Was there something that I was rebelling against? And why? Right? Was there something else that may have happened in my life, or something else that I may have experienced that I somehow thought had taught me to be this way, and that it was acceptable to be that way? Right? So that's the one side of it. The other side of overcoming that shame is I need to own it. Whatever label I perceive I've given myself or others gave me, I need to own it. So that loudmouth chick that used to dance on tables on the university union in the cafeteria, I raised my hand. Yes, it was me. Yes, it was me. Is there any explanation for it? No. Does there need to be one? No. Was there joy in my experience at the time? I can tell you, yes, it was. At the time of my life. But other people have a perception that that's vulgar. Right? So then there's a label on me of being someone, a vulgar female. Right? I need to own that. I need to own the label of vulgarity. Does it mean I walk around and still maintain vulgarity? No, not necessarily. Because in owning that part, I also need to own the equal opposite side. Because this entire world is made up of both sides. And I think quantum physics has done enough to explain that to us, that duality and polarity exists. So while some people may have back then, and even still now, see me as that vulgar young lady dancing on the tables, others are going to see me as the kind-hearted, as the soft-hearted, as the one who's carrying a heart on a sleeve. Yet if you put those two together, they almost look as if they don't belong together, that they cannot live together. But they do. As soon as we start to recognize that we are everything in this world, absolutely everything, absolutely everything. We are the aggressors, we are the vulgars, we are the kind-hearted, we are the pious, we are the sweet, we are the generous, we are the stingy, we are all of those things. Denying parts of who we are is denying our whole self. So again, do I live in that label? Do I move in this world in the same way that I did before? No, I don't. It doesn't suit me anymore. And also, whatever my underlying psychological and emotional reasons was for doing that and being that way, I've dealt with. If it was attention seeking, where did I perceive I didn't receive enough attention? What within me felt that I needed the attention of others and therefore the validation of others? So I've dealt with that, and I'm still dealing with it on different levels. But I now no longer seek attention by dancing on a table. I no longer seek validation through vulgarity. I don't. So that means the healing is taking place and has taken place for some areas, and still there will be new areas that we're all dealing with as well. You see, as soon as we start to recognize that we are everything in this world, and that we start to own the label the story then becomes ours and not somebody else's to tell. You see, one of the things about shame is that we are deathly afraid that somebody else is going to tell that story, our story. We're deathly afraid that somebody else is going to point a finger at us and say, oh, you know what that was? I don't know, eh? But once you own it, you've taken your sovereignty back. The other areas that I find, particularly in my line of work as a coach, that has so much shame is around sexuality, sensuality, and our genitalia, right? And I know, again, well-meaning authority figures in our younger days, used to try and prevent us from either touching ourselves or try to prevent us from showing ourselves to others. And again, in an act of helping us to show us decency, right? And modesty, and to guard ourselves, right? So again, all well-meaning. But if it came with a strong narrative of it's dirty, it's ugly, it should be hidden, it's a secret, right? We grow up with that narrative already embedded within us. And so some of us are actually walking around having this sexual shame without having any form of event, so to speak, like an actual physical event that made us experience that. It's the words that we heard growing up. Then there's the extent also of those of us who have experienced sexual trauma, right? Who actually experience physical sexual trauma, who were violated in some way. Most victims feel completely shameful, right? But none of that was your fault. None of it. So again, it comes back down to, in those circumstances and in both of those scenarios that I gave, it becomes important for us to own that narrative. It becomes important for us to be able to look at ourselves and say, hold on a second. Have I learned to love my sacred temple, my body temple, my sacred body? Have I learned to love it in all its glory? And that means that I can love my genitals. I can love every part of my body. And I can embrace it as this God creation that I've been placed on this earth as. And not allow someone else to take away my sacredness. And not allow someone else to take away what I deem as beautiful. And if somebody has robbed me intentionally or unintentionally from seeing myself and all of my parts as beautiful, I would like to reclaim that. I would like to reclaim that. And so starts a journey of starting to learning to love ourselves in a different way, and to love all parts of ourselves in different ways, right? To do away and to heal the parts of a hurtful narrative, right? Because I cannot begin to tell you what that actually does, particularly to women. What that does to women when they do eventually find themselves in beautiful relationships. But their intimacy suffers because there's this niggle at the back of their heads of that's shameful, it's ugly, it's dirty. No, it's not. It's beautiful. It's the life force energy of this earth. It is the birthplace of all mankind. How can it be? It cannot be. It's impossible. And I refuse to accept that narrative. But I too accepted that narrative as a child. I too did. So whether your shame is sitting in sensuality or sexuality, whether your shame is sitting in something that you have done to someone else, that you were maybe disrespectful towards someone, or that you stole someone's shoes, right? Or whatever that may be, own up to it. Own up to it. And again, owning up to it doesn't mean always that you need to go and own up to the other person, but first yourself. Own up. I did that, actually. That was me. I did that, right? Just recently, I spoke on social media, in my group, the Sacred Collective, on Facebook, as well as in written form, about something that I had experienced, which again, I mean, it's gone, it's done, it's dusted, but there was such a beautiful lesson that came out of it for me. One that I could have actually felt and sat with in deep shame because of it, right? But I chose not to go down that route of feeling shame. I realized that as a coach, there was something that I was so slow to get. And that part was, that other people's process is actually theirs, no matter how long they take and no matter how much they hesitate, right? Sometimes I used to get involved, not maybe verbally, but in my energy. I would always think like, oh gosh, if only I could help you further, but I realized that also was interfering in somebody's journey. And I came out on social media and apologized for it. If I've done it to anyone, if anyone sensed it, if anyone heard me saying it, if anyone felt offended by it. But I could have also kept quiet about it and just lived in shame. That, oh crap, I did that to someone. Or oh crap, I did that to people. And hide a certain part of me and a certain way of being within me that was also then stunting my own authenticity and my own evolution. This journey of loving ourselves, again, coming back to the previous 2 episodes, has got so much to do with us being self-accountable. Accountable to ourselves and thereby accountable to the people around us. I've been privileged. I will say the word privileged. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it because but it is a privilege. It honestly is. I've been privileged to sit with so many clients over the years, dealing with different aspects of their shame. Shame in having had more than one unsuccessful marriage, or shame in actually just having an unsuccessful marriage, or a divorce for that matter. In fact, not all divorces is because of unsuccessful marriages. Or they had a former drug addiction, or a former sex addiction, or some form of addiction, or that they were abused, or that some people feel shame around their own perception of themselves, right? Like I find so many people who often feel themselves unworthy, or feel themselves lesser than or not enough. And they have shame around it. And there's no need to feel shame around who you are and what capacity you have and that you are in this world right now. However, there are ways in which to find out where exactly you are worthy and where you are enough, and to build on that. We are never not enough. We are exactly as we should be, right? So I've had the privilege and the opportunity to deal with so many of these situations, and I can tell you safely that when people start to deal with that shame, it's like a veil has quite literally have lifted over their whole bodies, especially their faces, especially their eyes, especially their heart. that shame is such a heavy burden to carry. Such a heavy burden to carry. And we'd be wise to let go and to find ways to let go of that shame. Does it mean that you go out into the world and go and take up podiums and start saying, listen, I used to be shameful before and now I'm going to tell you my story? No, you don't need to do that. In fact, I probably don't advise it. But self-ownership is the first thing that matters. How many other people you tell is not of importance, right? We have shame in almost every area of our lives. If you look at academically, for example, in learning, there are so many of us that assume that we have shame around, oh, I don't have a degree, or I didn't finish school, or I didn't finish my degree, or I don't have all the accolades, or I didn't go that far, right? So there's one in the learning. We have it in our social status. Right? Oh, I'm not cool enough as that person. Or I don't have as much money as that person. I don't live in a better house than that person. And we take on shame by those comparisons, right? Like we will feel shameful that our house is smaller than somebody else's in the family. What a crock of BS. What a crock of BS, right? The size of your house never matters. It's the love in your house that matters. It's the welcoming energy within your house that matters, right? So why feel shame around what you do have? Then there are, as I said, finances, right? Or I don't have as much money. Or you're going out and you feel with your friends and you can't maybe pay, or you say no to an outing because, and you feel shameful that you're not at the same level supposedly as someone else financially. There is nothing to be ashamed about. Speak your truth. No, guys, sorry, that's not in my financial priority this month. Maybe next time, right? We have it in our families, right? Where we have so much, our shame in our families comes from a whole bunch of things, actually, right? I don't know. Some people have it around their siblings. Some people have it around, again, incidences within the family, or certain people in the family that others may be judging as, lesser than. And so we, by association, almost take on the shame as well. I think one of the big ones for me is the spiritual shame, right? The spiritual, and I'll put there /religious shame, where we feel that we are either not religious enough, Muslim enough, Christian enough, Buddhist enough, connected enough, God-fearing enough, God-loving enough, right? Or praying enough, or dhikring enough, or remembering enough. And we walk around with that shame, Oh, I can recite as beautifully as that person or as accurately as that person, so I need to sit with the shame of that. No, I don't, actually. Because I can tell you now, the longer you sit with the shame, particularly in an area like that, in the religion and in spirituality, the longer you sit with the shame of that, the more it is actually preventing you from actually getting closer to God. Because you're walking and you're arriving with this hidden form of self. Because that's what shame does. Shame wants you to hide. Shame wants you to hide. Shame wants you to dim yourself. And that's such an interesting knock-on effect. Because our light is not ours only. In fact, we come second. Our light is God's light. So if we're taking on the shame that's dimming our light, we're actually taking on something that is dimming the light of God. And that's not okay. It's not okay. So shame, however, does require vulnerability, as we may have picked up. It requires honesty. A truthful conversation with oneself. Now again, this doesn't need to be in a group with people. It doesn't need to be, with your spouse if you're not ready for that yet, right? It doesn't even need to be with a coach or with a teacher or with a guide if you're not ready for that yet. But what does need to happen when you are ready is to have that conversation with yourself, right? Yourself and God, right? So how does that happen? Well, if you're having the conversation with God, of course, this can happen through prayer. It could happen through conversation. It could happen through meditation. It can happen through silence, right? God knows what's on our hearts. But it can also happen through journaling. It can also happen through, writing out to ourselves and relieving ourselves of the burden of carrying it within our heads all the time. And also to the ability to disassociate from it so that it doesn't feel like it's part of us and therefore who we are, because we are not our shame. We are not what happened to us. We are not what we have done in the past. We are who we are now. And our evolution requires for us to grow. And in order for us to grow, we need to do better. And in order for us to do better, we need to learn more. And learning more is more about ourselves. Learning more is about our ability to be able to sit with ourselves and say, you know what, I have picked up that there's something that I am skirting around. There's something that I am avoiding. Why am I avoiding it? What is the story behind that? Is there something that I don't want to open my mouth about? Is there some situations or conversations that makes me uncomfortable, even without my understanding for now? Let me find out why. Let me find out how that is actually coming about and from where is it coming about. What's my earliest recollection of feeling this way? And can I go back there and see, is that a whole scenario as I remember it true? Or is there other sides and other angles that I have not yet seen that I can now go back and go and see? I cannot remember who the author was. I think it may have been Audre Lorde, who said, or was it Brené Brown? Anyway, doesn't matter. But there's a quote that says, shame loses its power when it's shared in safe spaces. Right? Shame loses its power when it's shared in safe spaces. Find that safe space for you. Find that space that is safe, that feels loving, that feels like you're being held. If at first that is only you, that's okay. If it is on a prayer mat with your prayer beads, if it is in a mosque or in a church or in a synagogue or in a temple, wherever that may be, if it may be in nature, if nature is making you feel safe and feels like it's enveloping you in love, then go and share your shame with nature. Right? But do something about it. Don't allow something of your past to form part of an identity of your becoming. Because it's not real. It's not true. You don't need to hold the burden of your past into your present. And I think one of the biggest benefactors of that for me is our offspring, our next generation. I'm very mindful that I have two wonderful and amazing children who are unique individuals in their own right. But I'm gently mindful that I've got cycles to break and I've got things to deal with so that I don't need to pass it on and hand it over to them, because that's just how generational patterns work. I don't need to have it carry on. And I think as a parent, I owe them that much. I don't actually owe them anything, but I'd love that to be a gift of love from me to them. That the path ahead, I'm making just a little bit lighter for them. And that whatever challenges, which are undeniable and undoubtedly going to be in their path, that it is less and that it's of their own doing and not of somebody in their past like me. Right? So I hope that this gives you an insight and maybe a new or a fresh or a reminder take on shame. And if anything else, I hope that it gives you the courage and the I think the spark that you may need to face it, to look and to say, okay, let me deal with this, because I am not my past. I am not the Noha that used to dance on a table anymore. I'm not her. And neither do I disgrace her of all those years ago. I don't. I loved her as I love me now. But that was a learned process. A learned process. So I hope that this gives you courage. And I hope that you take your power and your sovereignty back by dealing with those things. And again, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for being here. And I'm sending you so much love and blessings now and always. Goodbye.
Hope you showed the way to live with love in every day. In every soul you spark a flame. Through your touch we're never the same. With open arms you heal, you care. Your wisdom's more than words can share. In your embrace the lost are found. Your presence lifts us from the ground. Noha, you're the light we follow. You turn our pain into tomorrow. A blessing here, a blessing still. All lost grace, your soul will fill. You move the mountains in our minds. You teach us all that love can